The Cloudcast is sponsored by Intel Cloud for All, driving the creation of tens of thousands of clouds.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast, coming to you live, as always, from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Aaron, good to have you back. We haven't done a show in a couple weeks together.
Yeah, I know. It's been a couple weeks, and it's definitely good to be back, without a doubt.
So good to have you back. You're getting settled into the whole NetApp thing. You guys are getting acclimated into that Borg. How are things going? It's a deep sigh.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, but you know, I had to decline my first meeting to prep for a meeting today. So yeah, I'm definitely getting used to big company culture again, which, you know, it's been a couple years going from the startup to the big company, and I was like, oh, this is what it's like.
Yeah, you don't get to make decisions for yourself anymore. So lots of committees. All right, well. So good to have you back. And in the last couple of weeks, we've been talking a bunch about. And it wasn't sort of intentional, but we had a couple of really good guests, and we got to talking about sort of operational issues and deployment issues and networking challenges and stuff which is not necessarily right in our sweet spot, but obviously is really important to everybody who's doing DevOps stuff and doing modern things around cloud and all. And we thought with things like the RSA conference coming up and, security in the headlines and privacy in the headlines, we thought, what better way to kind of keep going on that theme than to have somebody come on and talk about security and how it applies to all this stuff. So really excited tonight to have on Alan Cohen, Chief Commercial Officer at Illumio. Alan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, guys. Glad to be here. One of these, I do have to see your big broadcasting studio, because I'm a big fan of those.
It is, yeah. We started. Well, you're an ex-Cisco guy, and Aaron and I know this. We started in, I think, what was a very, very small wiring closet in Cisco back in the day, because it was the only place we could find that was kind of quiet. So that was the original massive studio, and now it's sort of expanded into some other things. So now you're a podcasting guy. Before we get into the Illumio stuff, you're a podcasting guy. Tell us about what you do with your podcast.
So we actually have a podcast called Tailgating Security, and as a long-suffering, over 10-year Oakland Raiders season ticket holder, we try to think about what's like when you're sitting on a bunch of folding chairs and you have tailgate down and you're grilling, and we talk to folks around the industry, CISOs, people who have started technology companies, and we talk about the issues in hand. We talk to them about how they see things from kind of a broad swath. We never talk about products. If we talk about products, we tend to beat people up for that, because security has become such a front and center issue. So we try to get a little bit behind the people who are building the stuff or dealing with the issues, and it's fun. I mean, you guys podcasted; it's fun, and we always ask people what superhero they would be. We have a kind of a set of stock questions, and if they prepare, then we mix them up again.
Yeah. No, that's cool. That's good. It's it's great just to be able to sort of just riff with people like you would being at a conference, or like you said, tailgating before a football game or something like that. So very cool. So for anybody who doesn't know Illumio, because you guys have been around for a couple of years now. Give us the 101 of the company, and then let's talk a little bit about your background, because you've got a very interesting background in terms of kind of changing things and disrupting things, and let's tie the two of those things together.
Okay, well, they're definitely tied together. So Illumio is not a Harry Potter spell, right? Though it does sound like one. Illumio is a data center and cloud security company that's built a software platform that effectively does three things. And I won't talk a lot about it, the product, but what we do is we reverse the model. So we build security at the application and workload level and work out. So we have no dependency on the infrastructure, because it kind of runs everywhere. We really mirror the computing motion. So it works on bare metal, it works on VMs, it works on containers, it works in Amazon, it works on Nutanix, it works in your own data center, it works in OpenStack. Because we're decoupled, we mirror the computing motion. So if you have very dynamic computing, like you have things like vMotion, or now you're running Docker or other forms of Linux container that's very temporal, the Illumio software effectively spins up, and we can spend some time on that. With that, follows the workloads and the applications around. But the core thing that we do is we provide a series of security services that include adaptive segmentation and encryption that shrink the attack surface from a communications and process point of view in the applications by drawing tighter and tighter concentric circles around them and basically limiting access through whitelisting right down to the process and port level on an actual workload itself. So it's very fine-grained level of control. And what that means is that there are just fewer ways that bad actors or carelessness can create an exposure inside a data center or inside a public cloud.
Okay. So if I understand the basics of it, application gets deployed, your software gets deployed with that application, like you said, at the host level, container level, whatever's appropriate. And then it starts dynamically figuring out what's going on in that host with those applications, right? There isn't this kind of manual, like, okay, it's port this and port that. And these are it's figuring it out on the fly, right? And there's some centralized system that's then going, okay, what's going on?
Well, that's exactly right. So we basically live inside the operating system and we see everything, and that gets kind of basically forked over to a giant brain that we call the policy compute engine, which technically is closer to, let's say, the Google search engine than a firewall or an IDS device. And the first thing it does is it builds a topological graph or map that we call the relationship graph of all of the workloads and all the communications flows. And it's very physical, and it has a physical dimensionality to your computing, and we allow you to visualize it so you can actually see all of these things and see what's talking to what. From there, you can either write policy, or, that's kind of an organic ground up way of using Illumio. We can also take security rules from CMDBs like ServiceNow or orchestration systems like Chef, Puppet, Ansible, Salt, those kinds of things. So what's interesting is we've built a distributed computing platform and applied it against a data center and cloud security problem. So we're kind of a very cloud native kind of product, but we spent 2 years in stealth. So if you haven't heard of Illumio, don't feel bad. We've only been out of stealth for a year. And while we did that, we realized that enterprise data centers were going to be the primary target as much as the cloud. So we've brought basically a cloud-centric system deep into the heart of the enterprise data center, as well as operating in the normal environment you would see us in things like Amazon or Azure. And that's very disruptive to people because it doesn't look like the traditional infrastructure model.
And so, Alan, it's really fascinating, this idea of this adaptive security model. But also, too, what I wanted to do is relate it back to how has this been kind of the natural evolution of Alan, quite frankly, between, Airespace and Nicira and some of these other companies. You've kind of been serial disruptor over the years. And how has that kind of rolled through your career?
Well, I think, what you do is you look, what I would say is that, look, we just came out of 30 years of client server technology. So, Airespace was the kind of one of the first companies to allow basically a centralized controller to allow you to manage wireless LAN at great volume. It was completely antithetical to Cisco's model. And what they do, they actually bought us, right? And it's actually become the key point for the industry. I mean, when we got to Cisco, it's a $500 million business. Now it's a $2.5 billion business. And, Nicira also taken that step further, much more kind of dynamic virtualization principles. And then Illumio is like pure distributed computing. So for me, I would say that I'm a up from infrastructure kind of guy that came from the world of CLI and known places in the network and set points, and have evolved increasingly into these dynamic environments. What that's led to is, causing a lot of trouble for incumbents. The first one obviously swallowed us. The second one, wound up inside of VMware. We're hoping Illumio is a very large company and we'll be podcasting with you guys for a long time. So I think for me, I tend to find problems that can't be solved by incumbents because of the innovator's dilemma and go after them hard and then try to build enterprise kind of quality systems that allow you to address it at scale. And the problem that we're working on now is so much dramatically larger And so, like when I was at Airespace, the wireless LAN market was probably $1 billion. And then when I got to Nicira, we were basically competing with networking at the top of the rack switch, right? So a fairly big market. Illumio is going after basically computing for the entire data center cloud, and the announcement we made this week also starting to reach into the user community, multiples bigger. So I'd say, like if you're a prize fighter, you're always looking for a set of training fights, right? You got to kind of work your way up. So I guess I've gone to bigger and bigger disruptions. Those were great training exercises. I mean, they were really wonderful companies with incredible engineers and, great vision. But this one feels like the real big kahuna to me. Yeah. So I guess it took me a while to get good.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. You said we've been doing this client server thing for 30 years, and you sort of put that in perspective, and you go, okay, there's no argument there about how long it's been going on, and then you think about, okay, from say the mini computing world or the mainframe world to the PC world, okay, like how much of it was the same, how much of it turned out to be the same, and in for the most part, you go, not very much. Like, some of the same companies, but very little of the technology, very little of the architecture stayed the same. And we look at where we are in the cloud world, and, Amazon's been around since 2007, but realistically, people started kind of getting into this stuff around 9 or 10. So we're about 5 or 6 years into this. You think about this as maybe a 30-year trend. What you guys are trying to do basically in starting over, in essence, or sort of starting from scratch and flipping the model, it's almost a necessity, right? It's not really an evolutionary thing. Like, it's a necessity thing, given that, what we're going to be doing with cloud and containers and multiple clouds won't look anything like what we've been dealing with for 30 years. I mean, is that the way you guys kind of think about this, in terms of you had to do it completely differently or do it very differently?
Oh, yeah, no, we had to do it because, when I first met the founders of the company over 3 years ago, and they showed me the first version of the software, and I started thinking about it, I said, you realize this thing that we've built is actually alive, right? It's not a virtualized version of a prior byte. So if you think about what virtualization did, it took the old model and put it into software, but it's the same model.
Yeah, it's a server.
Right?
Yep.
A virtual server and a physical server still operates like a server, still has dependency on storage, still, and memory and network. And if you look at how, Facebook and Google, and particularly Google, right, and Amazon, they are reconstructing the stack. And I think the thing that's most important here is that the definitions, the architectural definitions that we've had, where by the way, you guys are like, you're storage guys, and I'm a networking guy and a security guy, and I was part-time a virtualization guy, right? Those categorizations, I think, are going to go away. Yeah. We have a partnership with a company called Nutanix. I don't know if you guys have spoken to them, right? They are not a better version of people who've kind of pushed together network, storage, and servers, right, and then glued it together. They are actually building a software layer, that starts to change how those components are. At the end of the day, you're moving zeros and ones around, and increasingly as processors become more powerful, but more importantly, as distributed computing platforms allow you to take on functions in the big C computing, where they live. I mean, think about these applications. They're multi-tier. And I may put the web tier in Amazon, and I may put the databases in my own data center, and I've got to stretch across them to construct basically a digital experience for a customer. I don't own half that infrastructure. I'm working on different principles. I may be using some open source stuff along the way. It's what's that old line from Training Day? We're playing checkers, not chess.
Yep.
So the intelligence that it takes to put these systems together take large distributed processing. So at Illumio, at its heart, is a giant brain that we keep making bigger and bigger and smarter and scaling out. And I think all of the things that we've been working on for the last 10 or 15 years are heading in that direction. More distributed, more dynamic, more heterogeneous, and definitely more hybrid. And that's the real world. Not the world like, buy my box or buy my software running on a box and good luck. And you're never going to put that genie back in the bottle.
Well, and I think, when you look at the companies today that are growing and successful and so forth, like it has to be a software play. That's a given, but it has to be a platform play. There has to be a platform that's helping customers accelerate their learning curve faster than they can do themselves. And I think that's the difference. Is that the folks who basically, like you said, replicate something else, you're forcing the customers to build this learning curve on the fly. And if you're building that learning curve for them, they get value immediately from it.
Totally. I think that's totally part of it. You know what's interesting that we've learned, and I don't know if you guys have seen this. So, when I look at the customers that we've had in the last year, the people we work with, and we have about 50 customers that are in, various forms of production. I always say, to buy your data center security for your most valuable assets from us, you have to be either really visionary or really desperate, right? I mean, we're 150 people in Sunnyvale, and look, we're well-funded, and we have a good team, and we have a really good platform. I mean, our VP of engineering was 60 at VMware, he was chief management architect. We have really good people here. But they are so forward-leaning or so acutely underserved by other technology options. They are willing to go past the traditional constraints. Some of the constraints are technology, and some of the constraints are actually how do they run their IT operations. I don't know, Brian, when you and I met a couple of weeks ago, I have this thing I call you think about, there are people who build apps, they're kind of like DevOps people or app developers, and I call them the Department of Go. And then they put it onto the infrastructure, and they were like the Department of Slow. And then before it could go out into the market or be used internally, the security guys have to sign off, and they're the Department of No. And what we do is we allow No and Slow to move to Go. So we go to meetings with customers. There's infrastructure people, there's security people, and by the second meeting, there's DevOps people. So the knitting together of those communities, or maybe what we're seeing at the beginning of the fusing of those functions inside IT shops, is a big difference. And I got to tell you, 5 years from now, I bet you all those people are going to have different titles.
Yeah.
They're going to think about their job differently. App developers are going to think about security. Security people are going to think about speed. Infrastructure people are making decisions, build, buy, rent, right? They're not just looking at, traditional logos from their existing vendors. It's not a knock on it, because they're all being driven by speed. And increasingly, every large company that we meet is a software developer. They think like software developers, and you have to talk to them like software developers, no matter what function they're in.
Yeah, and that's that's in industries that aren't core software development, correct? Banking.
Well,
that's
right. I think about it. I have this customer, creative artist, and they are $1.5 billion talent agency. Their CIO, Michael Keithley, is one of the smartest people I've ever met. He is one of the premier users of SaaS. He, obviously we are his data center and cloud security platform, and his product is people and managing talent.
Right.
But he needs to operate in a different model. But another customer of ours that I love, and I'm actually on their headset right now, is Plantronics. They build hardware for a living.
Right.
But we got involved with them because they, for their largest part of their business, is building call center headsets. They realized that, wow, we can tell people how long they've been on, what the transmit power is, productivity of the reps using it. And they said, we can create a headset as a service and provide all that information, all that heuristics to make people more efficient. They set it up as a service. Well, they became a software developer when they did that. And it's all runs in Amazon, and our customer is the DevOps manager.
Interesting. Very interesting.
And the first time we met him, he took the keyboard out of our hands. He goes, I know. We show you, we're on our UI and we're doing the demo. He takes the keyboard out of our hands and he goes, I can use this. This looks like Network Chef. And he starts flying through it. It was almost like that scene in Jurassic Park where the girl's in the control room. She goes, I know this. This is a Unix system. And she turns Jurassic Park back on, right? She didn't have a lesson on how to do it. So we're going to see a lot more of these people. And those of us in the IT industry, if we don't embrace and empower them, they're going to leave us behind.
Yeah, and it's such an interesting trend because having up until very recently done a startup and the model of the buyer is just so different in our industry. And that is a decently recent change. It's been a long time coming, But I think it's just within the last couple of years where, a lot of people wrote about it, a lot of people talked about it, but I do firmly believe, especially for these more forward-looking companies, that time is here without a doubt.
No, I mean, Aaron, I think you're exactly right, and the real dictate of that is who's driving the spend, right? At the end of the day, that's the rubber meets the road, and who increasingly calls the shots. And the developers are only responsible to the business, right? They're responsible to the business owners. So they're very driven by urgency. They're driven by innovation, and they're infusing that through the rest of the IT organization. And you know what? It turns out the other folks in IT, they're not exactly Luddites. They're actually pretty smart, and they're getting it. And we see them everywhere. But, for us, the part that's really most interesting is we're watching security have a real seat at the table as opposed to being an enabling function, because if there's no trust in your product and service, you're basically done.
Well, and I have to imagine it changes a little bit. When you're dealing with the developers, like you said, you're dealing with people who, more and more are going to sort of be creating the face of the company, right? As the company becomes digital, right? So, use Plantronics as your example. We know them, from what we used to be like the quality of their headsets and, how long the cord was from your PC to the headset and all those sort of things. And now if you're talking about them getting into, offering a service that's going to get into, what's the experience that their product helps customers deliver in terms of audio quality, or like you said, things like, can I keep track of how long a call agent is on the phone, and, the whatever that's going to impact, like, the health of that person, or other things that are not just selling that piece of hardware. Now, all of a sudden, you have to think about security in a whole different way, because you get hacked on the inside, people can keep it quiet. You get hacked on the outside, and it's all over social media. It's all over the news. I mean, it's a big story like that. That's got to be front and center for people.
It's costing CEOs and some boards their jobs, right? And so people are as serious as a heart attack. But it's interesting what you just said. I never thought about it this way, but I think IT people are now in the experience business as much as they are in the data process. Remember, you guys are not old enough. I'm not quite old enough to know this, but if I'm a fan of books about computer science history, is that, IT was originally called data process. And there's some people who still think about it that way, not many anymore. Now it's all about what experience you're providing for your employees and your end users. And, the iPhone changed how we communicate. We're seeing things like Slack change how we work together. And, you pick a bank based on how much you like the mobile phone app, as much as like what their interest rates are and how easy is it to pay bills from that. I have 2 kids in college. I don't know if they've done anything other than do their banking from a mobile phone.
Yep. No, we heard that from Capital One. They said that the mobile phone is now their branch office, so they have to have that.
Yeah, very innovative. But we like Capital. Very innovative. They have actually, if you ever have a chance, visit their innovation center in San Francisco. They have, it is really changed. So you take that attitude. So what you're doing is you're now fusing the people who create products and services for a business, and it's becoming fused with IT. So our goal as a company is to make security, the enabling layer to get to yes, as opposed to the police that say no. Because even with all of the hacks, people still have to run their business. Yep. They still have to innovate. And it's not a perfect analogy, but, people have learned long ago. I come from a Navy family, so I'm not a complete expert on this, but, you can't win a war just through an Air Force and just bombing, because after the bombing ends, people kind of go out and do their business. And I think that's what a lot of people have done in the security environment. They are finding ways around the risks. And what's interesting, so we have RSA coming up in a couple of weeks, and I don't know if you guys are going to visit, but last year, the last 2 years in IT have all been about hacking. This has been hacked and that hacked, and you got to detect all the bad actors. I think what we're going to see a shift in, and it's something that we play a role in with lots of other people in the industry, is less about detection and more about containing the blast radius and reducing the risk. So accepting the world as a dangerous place and reducing the amount of damage that can occur, as opposed to thinking that you're going to stop it in its tracks. And that's why
going from a model of 100%.
Well, it doesn't work, does it, Aaron?
Right, exactly.
People, and what's interesting is when you look at a lot of the large hacks, it wasn't that they didn't buy great technology. They bought it from, most of the leading vendors. It was how human beings stitched them together, where a lot of the risk. So you look at a lot of the big hacks, and they had great technology. They had FireEye and CrowdStrike and, Symantec, and they had great firewalls from Palo Alto. But so what I think what happens is that security is going to have to take more of a form like we are, where we're effectively a synaptic pulse of the broader computing environment. And we're kind of in touch, in tune, and alive to when something bad happens in an environment to both alert on it and take action. And that's how systems are being built. I mean, it's not a joke that we're all talking about AI these days, right? We're just starting to introduce our first machine learning capabilities inside of Illumio, where we can actually suggest to people how they should run their security, not just allow you to configure it. It's an exciting time. And I think, you look at a lot of the great systems that are being built around the world, they look exactly the same way.
Hey, now you guys, we talked about this a little bit. We didn't dove into the system, but we've got, pointers to the product and demos in the show notes for people. You guys obviously started off, server to server communication, application, it's sort of the traditional, protect the endpoint, server type thing. You guys sort of are changing that up a little bit. You're kind of broadening it. You've gotten into the, kind of protecting users to a certain extent. Talk about what you guys just recently announced and why it's such a big deal in terms of, helping companies and impacting, keeping users safe and devices safe and so forth.
Thanks for that. So yeah, one of the things that we recognize, and we've been getting a lot of feedback from customers, which is like, hey, it's great that you guys do all this intra and inter-server and application protection, but we have this other vulnerability point, which are end users. Obviously that is one of the big risk variables is an end user logging into an authorized end user logging into an application in the data center or in the public cloud. And then from there going on and doing, really horrible things. So what we recognize is that if you look at the kind of source of truth about end users in most large computing environments, there is really one major source, which is the entitlement system and the authentication system, which for a large part of the enterprise is really Active Directory. So what we did is we actually fused the entitlement capabilities of Active Directory, which, by the way, OneLogin or Okta do effectively the same thing. They say what you're allowed to log into and what you're allowed to use. But what they don't do is it doesn't go far enough anymore, because I might use my Active Directory credentials to say I'm allowed to log into the CRM system and email and maybe the company's HR system. And that's maybe the only three things I'm allowed to log into. It doesn't stop me from trying to connect to the other 42 systems we run in our business. So that's where Illumio comes in. So we've actually married those entitlements of what you're allowed to log into to the communications capabilities, what we do from a segmentation, whitelisting, and encryption, and saying now not only are you only allowed to log into those three applications, you can't even see or connect to the others. As an end user, let's say, my buddy Matt stole my laptop. Yes, he can log to those three, but he may try to hack and use my credentials to go into the other sets of applications. Now you can't even do that. We call it actually application cloaking. If you're a fan of Star Trek, right, with the Klingon cloaking device, you can't even see the other things. You don't even know they exist. Yeah. So you can't crawl around. And you can't see them and you can't connect to them. So the metaphor for that is like, entitlement credentials are like the keys that allow you to open the front door of your house. Illumio actually stops you at the white picket fence. You can't even see, get, or connect to the door anymore. And we've gotten an enormous amount of, just in the last month or two in talking to folks, an enormous amount of interest in this. So what we're trying to do is bring two critical sources of truth, how your data center is supposed to operate and what your users are allowed to do together. And interestingly enough, there's probably about 200 million servers that Illumio has pointed to, there's probably about 500 million desktops we can now also bring into this control model. So we're pretty stoked about it, and we made it real easy. You just drop the group policy objects, group policies from Active Directory into our policy model, into our system, and that's it.
Yep. No,
it's bone dry simple to get it up and running.
Yeah, and I mean, assume you guys are going after sort of like you said the desktop users in enterprises, but I got to imagine that's got to be really interesting and appealing, like for managed service providers to be able to say, you know what, I can ensure to my customers that my internal staff isn't going to be able to get access to your systems, isn't going to be able to, be a rogue agent and take you out of compliance and stuff. So that's an interesting way to deal with stuff from multiple angles.
Yeah, what we think will probably be like a very first fast market for this will be the couple 100 million. By the way, this is my mouth to God's ear, right? But the couple 100 million of VDI instances, right? Because people put. I mean, if you think about what VDI is just a desktop running on a virtual machine.
Yep.
In the data center, and then basically effectively a dumb terminal on the other side. But it's not restricted to that. But that's probably the first target. And people have moved to VDI for security. But now now because of the availability. What's interesting is that we learned in a lot of customers their VDI plants are sitting right in the heart of their most critical other IT computing assets in their data center.
Oh yeah. It lives on the same servers. It's just VMs.
Right. A lot of times that's how people get to it.
Well, and the core thing that we do is rather than protect the perimeter, and there are other people who work really hard at that, we've reversed the math. So from a security point of view, an attacker only has to be right once to get past the perimeter, right? The perimeter has to be perfect every time. But in Illumio's world, by protecting the inside, an attacker only has to make one mistake, and we'll catch them and stop them. Yep. Because we restrict the amount of hops they can make inside the environment. So we're trying to work on changing the calculus there.
Gotcha.
So there's these guys who are using kind of like war fighting analogies all the time. But it really is. It's about setting up a lot more tripwires for anything bad than stopping anything bad from happening.
Yep.
Well, and it also seems like you've taken a slightly different approach there in the fact that instead of attacking the low-hanging fruit, you're actually attacking some of the hardest problems first.
People start with Illumio. They don't put us in development environments. They put us on their what we call them high-value assets.
Right.
Right, because it's the Willie Sutton theory, right? People rob banks because that's where the money is. People go to databases because that's where the information is, and so that's what people really need to protect and really ring fence away from their general purpose computing, and that's traditionally in a very that's very hard to do, and using networks and choke points to do that involves a lot of traffic steering, a lot of complexity, and a lot of error and correction. So I think that's why our approach so far has had really good traction.
Couple. Well, listen, let me wrap this up real quick. I'll ask you one last question because, like you said, you're a football guy. The Super Bowl was just out in the Valley, a couple of weeks ago. Mm-hmm. RSA is coming up, sort of the Super Bowl of security in terms of number of people. And what's the for people that maybe don't live and breathe security every day, what are the 2 or 3 things they ought to be looking for coming out of RSA? The big topics that people are talking about, maybe especially to like the DevOps crowd.
Well, so for the DevOps crowd, they need to figure out first and foremost how to bake security into the development cycle, and not try to how to bolt it in afterwards. I think, anything that you build and then you try to bolt something on afterwards, it's painful, right? And so I think the security industry and the DevOps industry are just starting to get together, and they're going to do this. I think there's going to be a lot of this at RSA where they are going to say, how do we get started working together day one, as opposed to adding security in, 3/4 of the way before those applications were built. So I think that's going to be a big area. The second area is that, you can't stop what you can't see or you don't know about. So what I think is going to be increasingly important is rather than all this focus on detection, which is what really last 2 RSAs were about, people are going to say, I want to know how long something bad is. I want to see things in my environment a lot sooner. So if you look at most of the really severe hacks, the malware or the bad actor lived in these environments for weeks and months, and sometimes even as much as a year. Can you imagine having a burglar living in your attic for a year and then dealing with it after? So people want much more rapid understanding of potential threats in their environment and the ability to take action quicker. And then I think, I think the other thing is that security has had a big bump up in spend over the last couple of years, while infrastructure has been relatively flat. I think people are going to want to understand much more of the economics of security. There's been a lot of discussion of things like cyber insurance. It's kind of a different issue, but it's related. So I think people are going to have to start to quantify security decisions based on what it means to the business and not just how to protect it. So I think those three things are going to start to come together in a much more fulsome way. I think it's a lot about security coming into the mainstream.
Yeah, no, it makes sense, and all things for folks to kind of keep an eye out. And in the next couple of weeks, will be people get bombarded with security announcements and so forth. So kind of sort through the noise with some of that stuff. Listen, let's wrap it up. Best place for folks to find you other than Illumio.com. Anywhere you're going to be out and about, people can buy you a beer.
Oh, well, we have lots of people out there in the world. Me personally, I'm mostly here, but I'm around. They obviously can meet up with us, RSA. We have Illumio representatives in most NFL cities, to continue that analogy, and including where you guys live. So we have lots of ways to meet up with people there. We're rapidly filling out the people who represent Illumio around the world. So if people are interested, we'll send people to them. And there's lots of information about Illumio all over the web. And
you're hiring for people that are actively interested?
We're very actively hiring. You know what? Finding people is the number one challenge for scaling and growing the company.
Cool. It's good to hear when some areas of the industry are having a tough time. So, folks, if you're interested, go check out some of the stuff over at Illumio. A lot of really smart people over there right now.
Well, thanks. We want a lot more. So, thank you for the bump on that.
Yeah, you bet. Well, listen, let's wrap it up with there. Folks, as always, you can find everything about the Cloudcast on the website. Thanks again to everybody for all the Krispy Kreme stuff. And Alan, thank you so much for being on tonight. Great to have you on. First time on the show. Hopefully we can have you back again soon.
Appreciate that. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for everybody for listening.
All right. Thanks, folks. Have a great weekend, and we will talk to you again soon.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.